morning. Good morning to those of you who are here in the room with us, and good morning to those of you who are here virtually. You're very much still with us. You're very much welcome. It's so good to be here. My name is Jessie Rhines, and one of the reasons that I'm here today is simply because I'm a member. I've been a member of UUCA for somehow a little over 10 years with my husband Corey and my two sons who you've just gotten to meet. And that alone is reason enough, so look out, to be asked to give a sermon. And that's because we belong to a community that really believes that every single one of us has something important to say. I know a lot of places say that, and I assume a lot of places mean that, but my experience is that here we really, really mean that. You know, that at any given moment, every single one of us is full of meaningful things to share. And so we action that, right? We be that. We are being the change that we wish to see in the world. Some of you I know from coffee hours or volunteer activities or from my years helping teach the little ones downstairs. Some of you I don't know at all, either because we've never met or because you're new. I'm so grateful to hear how many new members we have. I welcome you. I look forward to meeting you. Some of you I knew just kind of well, you know, or I knew your face, and then this thing called a global pandemic hit and froze everything. So I'm really grateful to be picking things up where we left off. So, you know, my talk today will help you just get to know me. And my hope is then that in coming hours and days and weeks and months, you'll feel free to come up and let me get to know you. Just people getting to know people. We're the threads of a wider community, and that's the fabric. Another reason why I was asked to give today's sermon is because many of you have expressed interest in hearing from a mental health professional right now, and I am one of those. I have a bachelor's in social work and a master's in counseling. I've worked in a variety of settings across the lifespan. I was a end-of-life social worker for quite some time, and then I was a youth and family therapist. I've worked in inpatient psychiatric hospitals, and I've taught mindfulness in schools and various things. But one thing that was the same throughout all of those different settings and years was that I had an increasing interest in the physical body and breath, and how one might bring the physical body and breath into therapy. And so I went back and studied something called yoga therapy, which is an emerging field, thank goodness. And I tend to call myself a somatic therapist because it does a much better job of describing the integration. You know, that when I see a client, I want to see all of them. The word somatic comes from the word soma, which means wholeness or integration, whereas the word yoga there's certain images that probably come to your mind because we have a very westernized, you know, American view of yoga. It turns out it's much, much more than that. Yeah. Traditional Western psychotherapy is what I would call top-down. So we use cognition and articulation, we verbalize, in order to get to the emotions or maybe the physical symptoms. And what somatic therapy does is it simply adds a bottom-up approach. So we start with the physical body and the breath in order to reach the other layers of us. And I love both. I love having both tools in my toolkit. The reason the body is so important, is because it can do two things in particular in somatic therapy. One, we believe that we should listen to the body. The body is dishing up so much information to us all the time. We got really excited in the last decade or so, and we're calling this the gut, the second brain, for example. It turns out we're going way beyond that now in the last year or two. We're learning that actually the body has almost all information before the brain. So I guess it's the first brain, and this is the second brain. the other, we have like a spidey sense, right? We have a lot of we have our own spidey senses. And the second thing that somatic therapy encourages us to do is to use the body, things like stance and breath, to change how we're feeling, to ripple into the mental and the emotional. So we can also use it as our own tool. And I actually don't want to go any further before I invite us to do a somatic experience together. I warned Anastasia, somatic therapists can't get through a talk without making you guys practice with us. You know that, right? She was like, okay. To me, this is just inviting all of you here. To me, this is making space for every layer of you. I want to show and tell, not just tell, that respect, right? I want to action that, be that. So let's just get comfortable. This won't hurt, I promise. You didn't know you're coming to a yoga class? This is a yoga class. And, compassion is our theme. I'm the last speaker on the theme of compassion. When we think of the word, we usually think of something that we offer to someone else, right? And it is that. But the etymology of the word actually means to feel with. So beautiful, right? To feel with. And yes, we can feel with another. But what I want to argue today is that it makes a lot of sense for us also to feel with the many layers of ourselves. And that if we don't have a practice of checking in with the many layers of the self pretty regularly, it can be harder. It can be more challenging to have compassion with others. Yoga philosophy describes us as made up of many koshas. That's a Sanskrit word for sheaths or layers. And we're just going to feel into each one together right now. So let's bring our visual awareness from the communal to the personal, to whatever extent that feels comfortable to you at this time. You can soften the gaze down. You could close the eyes if you'd like. Completely up to you. And I'll blend my love of these 5 koshas, 5 layers, with something from Thich Nhat Hanh, a beloved Buddhist teacher that died at the age of 95 this year. How are you today? He calls it. Feel the support of the chair beneath you. And feel the support of the building beneath the chair. Feel the support of this earth beneath the building. And then feel your physical body. Welcome the matter of you, the mass. And perhaps silently ask something like, "Hello, body, how are you today?" Without any judgment, we're just listening. We're letting the soma lead now. If there's a shift the body wants to make, of course, make that at any time. There might be tension, there might be pain, perhaps not. Feel from the inside out. Perhaps noticing the heartbeat or the temperature of air on the skin. Hello, body. How are you? And next we'll look towards that which animates the body, the breath. Feel free to simply watch the natural breath, or to play with fuller inhales or emptier exhales. Hello, breath, prana, life, force, chi. How are you today? Maybe notice how the breath creates certain movements in the physical body, at the chest or the ribs or the belly. And simply be interested the way you would be interested in a friend. And as we continue our journey through the koshas, the sheaths, greet the heart. Hello, heart. How are you today? What emotions are present? What is there to feel? A sorrow, a calm, an agitation, a gratitude, a boredom. There's no wrong answers here, and no one thing is better than another. That's the truth. Simply be with what is happening. You could even speak to an emotion by name. Hello, anger. Hello, calm. How are you today? And then we'll visit the mind. Hey, mind. How are you? Are things spacious or cluttered? Are there specific projects in there? Without, valuing one thought more than any other, simply practice being with what is. And I'll begin to end by saying that the next layer in this model is that which is watching. The layer above all the others. We call it the witness, or the wise witness, or the wisdom body. It's consciousness itself, and it's separate from the others. That's where you've been, in a way. And then the fifth, the highest kosha, is that which is above us, greater than us, that which we may call God or divinity or nature, where we plug into something bigger together. So let's travel back down through them to come back to the room. The divinity, the highest self or the wisdom body, the mental body, emotional body, breath, and physical body. And in your own time and your own way, I'll invite you back into the we space, the communal space. You can certainly practice not rushing. Thank you so much for that deep presence. Thank you so much. We'll be dipping in and out of that kind of practice today together. In the busyness of our days, we tuck parts of ourselves away, right? It could be a little thing like that opinion or commentary, it's not necessary. Or it could be a big thing, like one of those whole sheaths, like the physical body in general, to get through a hard work day, or the emotional body for a while. I know sometimes for me, when I come here on Sundays and I hear Josh start to sing, or Julie start to tell a story about refugees giving stuffed animals, I just weep, and I can feel, wow, that might be the emotional body of the whole week, right? And now I have a space to let it out. It's just practical that there are certain rules, written and unwritten, for how to behave with certain people or in certain settings, right? But if we never have a practice like that one, where we let the soma lead, where we show respect for the parts of ourselves, we may really become calloused, the way skin, is buried under layers of harder skin, and numb. And we reduce our self-awareness, right? And without self-awareness, we can't possibly have self-care. And it's also much less likely that we will be able to connect the threads to that larger fabric in any meaningful or authentic way, right? So it's the I and the thou, the self and the social. Self-awareness is the foundation for both, right, for all of it. And these very, very simple practices that we can all do have really become like my bread and butter, So you guys already know, it's been an exceedingly difficult couple of years in a lot of ways. You don't need me to tell you that. We have been undergoing fear for the safety of our very bodies. We have been isolated to varying degrees. Many of us have had economic struggles. We've had a racial reckoning sweep our country, and while that is a very important thing, it can also be a hard thing. Right? If we're really doing our work, it can be a hard thing for all of us. We've been enduring what seems, at least to me, like never-ending conflict, disagreements around our health care decisions and how to stay safe and how much to emerge and how much to stay in. And it's a lot. And it's been a while, right? And then more recently, the news has been full of war and war crimes, however redundant that term is. And it must be said that we have a very Eurocentric, white-centric news, and that wars have been going on in Sudan and Ethiopia and Saudi Arabia and Yemen for a while. But yes, more war, yeah. And war that we're seeing daily, war maybe a little closer to home. So it's been hard. But on the ground, things are much more complicated. On the ground, it's not that ground, there's so much more to it. And I find that as time goes on, I can rarely even say what is good and what is bad, just like the farmer in our opening story. You know, statistics will tell you, for example, that anxiety disorders spiked during the pandemic, understandably. But what they don't tell you is that people that had been anxious for months or years already now felt less alone. Statistics will tell you that clinical anxiety has come back down now, and it's at normal levels, pre-pandemic levels. But what that doesn't take into account is a subclinical, lingering sort of bracing that I think a lot of us are feeling. I know I am after the last couple of years, right? Depressions seem stickier, a bit more persistent. They're lingering. And what that doesn't mention is that the world having gone virtual opened up so many doors for my depressed clients, and it let them socialize more. It let them experiment with showing up to a place like this or any number of other places that they would have never ever dipped their toe in. And that will change their lives forever. You know, I mean, that's going to change as long as we're hybrid, generations to come, right? So I could go back and forth like this. I could go back and forth. It's really complicated. The pandemic has brought fear and sorrow and frustration. I was unable to visit my own father in his assisted living just a couple of miles away. And I understood the rules and I appreciated them, but it ended up being the last year of his life before he died of pneumonia. And so I really do get the frustration and the sadness. I still feel it, of course, you know. And the pandemic has brought slowing down and reprioritization and us learning a whole lot of cool stuff about ourselves. Another personal example is that my family and I started homeschooling at the height of it all because it seemed safest, and now we love it so much that we don't seem to be able to go back, right? Mama reserves the right to go back, by the way, but so far we really like it. So, you know, my point is it's complicated, and I want us to remember that it's complicated. And when we're seeing facts and figures, we have to know that, you know, surveys are wonderful for so many things, but there's a lot of things that just don't come up in a survey, you know? Surveys just don't ask, right? There's things that come up in slow and meaningful conversation, right? One piece of news that I can say is good news is that we are in the right place for complexity. If you're here, you're probably okay with the fact that I am absolutely unwilling to give you a soundbite. And with all due respect to other traditions, you would be in a different church if you were comfortable with people telling you the way that it is. Here's the one right way. Things are simple, right? Unitarian Universalists, we moved away from that, right? A long time ago, we branched away from that. And we are dedicated to the complexity and to fighting the very human tendency to see things as simple, to reduce. That's my experience. And another great piece of news is this. While I cannot possibly tell you what you need, because it could vary so widely, I can share these very simple somatic practices to help you know what you need. Yeah. And, I always say they're free, these practices. They're invisible, so you can do them in the car or in meetings. They have no side effects at all, and they really work. So let's do another. If our last practice together helped us to listen to the Soma, hear from the Soma, this next one will be an example of shifting the body just a bit. It's much shorter, to create some change, right? So I'm going to just shift my own physical body, and I'm going to guide you through a centering practice. So again, you might, tend to the self, look down, or soften the gaze. And I'll just ask you, quite simply, to see what happens in the physical body when I ask you to grow your length. Feel free to experiment. Yeah. Find the north and the south of you. Perhaps the tops of the ears are invited up to the sky. Beautiful. I love seeing all the allowances of movement. And then just see if anything shifts when I ask you to add the east and the west. You might feel something, you might not. We're just feeling our length and now our width. Integration. Making space. So lovely, thank you. And then from here, we're going to find our depth. We're just playing with dimensions, right? And there's a really specific way that I want you to find your depth. I'd like you to first, from the inside, find your back body. Have your own back. Yeah. And then keeping that back body, staying connected to yourself, to your back. Then think about opening the chest or opening to the world in front of you without losing your own back. Open the heart. And that's it. Just simply feel, perhaps if there's a plumb line in there somewhere, if there's a centering. And of course I encourage you to play with these at home. I'm giving you a very little taste. And again, in your own time, in your own way, you can return to the communal space. I really love that practice because it makes more room. So when I feel like there's a lot to process, I go for that one. And it's also one that I really recommend to us around this whole concept of I and thou, self and social, right? Some of us are so thirsty for connection. We're out there maybe overdoing it, wearing ourselves out. Others notice that when their soma dialed down the social appetite to get them through the pandemic, it hasn't turned back on yet, the social appetite. And then what that means is when we're out there in the world, there's all those different kinds, and that's tricky. It's hard, We're all in a different place. So this practice, this centering practice, really brings it home to the here and now in a concrete way. to feel your back, and then see if you feel like opening up and just how much, so we don't lose ourselves. Thank you so much for that. So I wanted to add that only as I was preparing for our time together did I realize that a lot of what drew me to these bottom-up approaches within all of my top-down training, turns out it was very much what drew me to Unitarian Universalism. Unitarian Universalism is kind of bottom-up. It's grassroots, right? We value the individuals, like I said when I first came, that I was asked to share simply as a member of the congregation, not just the lofty ideals, right? We value activism. We do so much work together. I have so many examples over the last 10 years, pizza and postcards, events here in this room, writing one postcard to one legislator at a time, or working at Camp Beagle. My son's involved in Camp Beagle, which is it's the UUCA response to church camp, evolution-based. That means we do our own curriculum. We don't take it from some national board, right? That's bottom up, right? Working yesterday, clipping and hauling and making the grounds beautiful. It's very bottom up. We've also formed a wellness committee. I'm involved in that, so that many of us in the healing professions can assist with pastoral care. Not just in the absence of Reverend John while he's on sabbatical, but ongoing, instead of laying it all on our reverends. That's a very bottom-up approach in a typically top-down world, right? If we recall that the word somatic means integrated, this is the most somatic church I can imagine. You know, it's a place where you can develop your mind in a study group, or be with your body in a yoga class, or walking through the labyrinth, or be with your heart as you sit and weep like I tend to do every Sunday. And all of this is coming, by the way, from someone who was not raised in a church, and I was actually told to stay really, really far away from them. My mom grew up in a tiny town on the Eastern Shore and was disgusted by the hypocrisy of the small white rural churches, the racism, and the sexism. And she warned me about churches, right? So it took me a while to set foot. It was only once I had children and thought, oh, we could use some support. We need people with similar values because our kids might listen to them, right? It takes a village, you know. Religions, just like therapies, just like psychologies, can do more harm than good if they are not embodied, if they don't have their heart and their mind and their actions in line, right? Religious leaders become disembodied when they focus on scripture without, living it, or when they create power over instead of power with. And therapists become disembodied when they allow their caseloads to get so big that their patients feel like numbers, or when they're not getting their own self-care and therapy to help with secondary trauma, so they are becoming more calloused emotionally. American insurance companies are disembodied, big time. If they pay for your mental health treatment at all, they either pay for a certain number of sessions without any regard to what's coming up in those sessions that might warrant further therapy, or they tell you they're done paying the minute a client rises out of a very, very narrow set of criteria. So this puts therapists in the position of having to either choose between keeping their patients sicker on paper, which is not only unethical but messes up your medical records for the rest of your life, or ending therapy, which, right when people are starting to emerge and integrate into the world, which to me is abandonment. I don't take insurance. I work on a sliding scale. A lot of us have taken that path. Thankfully, our tradition encourages activism because there's a lot of work. There's a lot of work left to be done out there. All the more reason to be centered, right? All the more reason to be centered. So I want to end with one more practice. If the first practice had us listening to our soma, listen to the body, and the second one had us kind of change to see how that could help ripple through the other koshas, the other layers, this last one generates good and then shares it. Right? And many of you will know this practice. Metta, or loving kindness, is the practice. And I'll just say before we dip into this last practice that the reason that I came today to speak with you instead of later on, as was the original plan, is that our own beloved Jane Kerrigan has to stay home today in preparation for surgery tomorrow. A longtime member and our president. Jane was going to be speaking today, and plans changed. And so we'll begin by sharing our support for Jane and for the surgery to remove the cancer in her kidney. And then from there we'll ripple out, and we'll ripple out, and we'll ripple out. Yeah. So I encourage you to get really comfortable for this one. Just, any way that feels good. And I would like for you to simply bring to mind someone that you love very much. And it could be more than one. You can let a whole scroll of beings come through. It could be a baby, a pet, a saint, or a figure. And just allow the heart center, the Anahata chakra, we call it in yoga, to generate warmth. As you dwell in memories of being with these beings, let yourself really feel. We have a natural loving kindness, a natural shining of the heart center. And we're just allowing that. We're just soaking that up. You might feel a warmth, or you could envision a golden glow or a light. Whatever's coming to you, please allow. What is it like to touch this person or smell this pet? Any sensory details. You might even allow the corners of the mouth to turn up as you think of the blessing of these beings. And then what metta, loving kindness practice, asks us to do is just to notice that we can keep that floodlight shining, and we can turn it anywhere. We can turn it to the neutral beings that help our lives run, like the post office man and the woman at the grocery store. We can turn it to each other here in this room, and those of you in your homes. May you be well. Or we can turn it to a specific person, like our beloved Jane, who I know is listening. Whether you know Jane or not matters not. You can think of the word Jane or know that she is a leader here. And we just send that light, that goodwill, feel. You could send it to cancer in general, all around the world, or to others that you know with cancer. You could share it with all disease that exists. You could share it with all dis-ease, with all suffering. Let yourself go here for just another moment. You might be surprised to see who comes up. They might need some metta, some loving kindness. Just let yourself keep raining this gift, the most precious gift, in their direction. Another way I like to practice this is to imagine my little longitude and latitude here in this beautiful building. And then it ripples out geographically. And it ripples out. and it ripples out from this synergistic practice that we're engaging in, eventually beyond the borders of our state, of our country, to all beings everywhere. Those in the midst of war on both sides, those in the midst of peace, to all beings everywhere. Because we know of the inherent worth and dignity, as Lisa shared. It's our first principle. And I'll invite you again to be tender as you decide what feels safest for you, for your body to wrap up. You might just let that light kind of come in a little closer. You might ask that it continues to shine as you go about your day. You might begin with the gaze down when you first open your eyes to see this self, and then to only slowly ripple out from there. Transition as you'd like to, respecting all of you. I knew we had a special group, but yeah. You guys take your time. I really appreciate that. Thank you so very much for going so deep with me. I want to thank you for feeling with you, compassioning with you. I want to thank you for feeling with me, and for making compassion a very active practice in the right here and the right now. May it continue.